And then I will hand it over to my friend and colleague, John, who will walk you through a lot of the details. And so to begin, I'd kind of like to set the stage and ask us to think about, what is success? What is it? How do we measure it? And how do we know if a person, a community, or a country is doing well? Well, for many years, governments have evaluated the well-being of their nations and in turn their citizens by measuring gross domestic product, or GDP, which captures the total value of goods and services produced within a country during a given year. And while GDP provides one objective numerical value of revenue generated, I think many of us are beginning to think that it might be a short-sighted and misguided measure of a nation's sole success, because it does not directly assess the quality of people's lives. So while it's commonly assumed that more money is associated with greater happiness, this isn't always the case for several reasons. Part of the problem is that the benefits generated by GDP are unequally distributed across the population, with some people having lots and many having little. And in addition, greater GDP can come at the cost of many things that we care about, such as harming the environment, which both directly and indirectly contributes to a person's well-being. Now, there are some famous studies in psychology and economics and in other fields that kind of nicely illustrate how more money doesn't always lead to happiness. One of my favorite visual examples is this, known as the Easterlin paradox, which I think provides a pretty vivid demonstration of how greater wealth doesn't always translate to greater well-being. So these are data from Japan, which show how production increased over 4 times during a span of a 30-year period, while life evaluations remained relatively stable. Now, it's interesting, we're going to talk a little bit about how we measure happiness in a minute, but life evaluations are one way we can assess how well or how happy people are doing, but there are also negative emotions, and that also shows a very similar pattern. And so thinking that GDP or these financial measures perfectly capture the quality of people's lives might be missing the boat on how people are doing. So if happiness doesn't flow directly from wealth, where can we find it? Well, I imagine you've talked about this a bit over the course of your semester together, but there have been a lot of conversations through philosophy, with inquiries into the nature of happiness and the good life. And it's received significant attention through many different historical philosophies. For instance, ancient Greece suggested that it was not luck or fate, but it was a focus of the mind. There are also other points of view from Plato and Aristotle that suggested that happiness came from enjoyment of what is good and beautiful, or importantly, through virtue, like helping others, or from simply the pursuit of hedonism. Other religious philosophies suggested it was through virtue and good faith, and other perspectives suggested through enlightenment suggested that, simply put, utilitarianism might be an approach for finding happiness. Now, these distinct and sometimes competing perspectives offer one direction on what represents happiness or the good life, but I think modern science offers a new approach. So rather than prescribing qualities or characteristics or the motives of what makes people happy, a large and growing scientific literature on the study of happiness suggests that this question can be empirically examined. So rather than just speculating or proposing what it is we think makes people happy, we can in fact measure it empirically. And it turns out that happiness can be measured in various ways. For instance, through brain activity, through asking friends or family by providing what we call peer reports, or even from afar by examining people's facial expressions. And while all of these methods help us triangulate on how someone might be feeling, many well-being or happiness scholars have argued that it's simply best to just ask a person directly. Not only does posing this direct question offer people the opportunity to measure this concept, but it's often suggested that if we really want to understand how someone is doing, we need to know how they are experiencing life themselves. And so this leads us to some of the ways in which scientists measure this concept of happiness, or what many researchers call subjective well-being. And one of the leading models of happiness, I think it is the leading model of happiness, suggests that subjective well-being, this kind of overarching umbrella term that colloquially is called happiness, captures three key components. The first is people's positive affect over here, and these are, simply put, the momentary positive feelings that we might experience throughout the day. This might come from enjoying some ice cream or delicious food. It could also come from helping other people. These are these short-term momentary experiences we have that are positive. A second component is negative affect. These are the short-term negative emotions we experience throughout the day. This could come from stubbing your toe or getting a bad grade, these short-term momentary negative experiences. Both of these, I should point out, capture shorter-term experiences, as you've probably noticed, and kind of reflect how people are doing kind of in their life right now. The third component over here is life satisfaction, and this is considered a more holistic, cognitive reflection of one's life as a whole. So it's not just how you're feeling right now in this moment, but if you're to step back and evaluate your life, taking everything considered, how would you rate your life as a whole? And so I just want to point out that you can experience all of these things differently, and sometimes in consistent ways and sometimes in different ways. So for instance, you could be really happy with your life, but in a bad mood right now, or you could be unhappy with your life as a whole, but be experiencing higher levels of positive affect because something good just happened. But generally speaking, more positive affect is associated with higher levels of life satisfaction, as we might suspect. Now, within the World Happiness Report, as I will show you in just one second, what we treat as our primary measure, one that is consistent and pretty robust over long periods of time, is this measure of life satisfaction, or this idea of life satisfaction. So how do we measure it? Well, the World Happiness Report prioritizes this measure of the Cantril ladder, which is shown right here on the screen. So it asks people to please imagine a ladder with steps numbered from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom of the ladder represents the worst possible life for you. So it poses this question to respondents: on which step of the ladder would you say you personally feel you stand right now? And so people are given a few minutes to respond, and they give a numerical answer ranging from 0 to 10 to reflect their life evaluation. Now, I think I'm going to pause in a minute or two and take some questions, but I want to point out that I think this approach has some benefits over simply asking or measuring a country's GDP, because it allows the respondents, the citizens, the respondents to the measure, to rate their life as a whole as they see it against their own personal subjective assessment of how things are going. And nicely, the World Happiness Report uses Gallup World data from the Gallup World Poll, which poses the same question around the world consistently year after year, allowing us, and primarily John, who will speak to you next, to look at changes in these average ratings across countries year by year, and examine what predicts these higher levels of life evaluations and what predicts lower levels of life evaluations. And so I'll just foreshadow what John will be talking about in just a second, but it turns out that across countries, we can predict the variation in which countries are ranking higher on the list and which are ranking lower in terms of respondents or citizens' average levels of life evaluations by studying a few key factors. One, of course, is GDP per capita. It's not that income doesn't matter at all, but it's certainly not the whole story. We can look at levels of corruption, people's self-reported health, their perceived level of freedom, but also some really important social variables that I think sometimes we're quick to overlook, which is social support. Do we have someone to count on in times of need? And generosity, that is, do we help others? And the most frequently focused measure in our World Happiness Report is generosity, captured by whether people have donated to charity in the past month, yes or no. So I'll stop there. I'll pull down my slides, and I'm happy to take a few questions before I need to hop off.
Thank you so much, Lara.